Welcome back to Watch Your Assets, where we've got your money on our minds. I'm Stephanie Bracken, and today we're going to be talking about education planning. It's back to school season already. It's hard to believe that the summer's just about to be over. I've seen all kinds of back to school stuff in Target. So, along with that is we get asked all the time about how do I fund my child, my grandchild, my relatives' education. It can be any person, any child who's getting ready to go to school, but most of the time it's parents or grandparents who are asking these questions. So I want to just cover a little bit about the different options that you have in terms of funding education on behalf of the child. So a lot of different options here. Let's start with some basics. 529 plans are going to be that's a very common piece or a common account that people like to open up when we're talking about education planning. So what is a 529 plan? This is going to be specifically earmarked for education expenses. So this is going to be in contrast to what's going to be a UTMA, which I'll get into in a minute. A UTMA is more along the lines of if you want to just set aside money that's going to grow with the markets for the child to be able to use for whatever they want to, that's going to be your UTMA. If you specifically want to, and I'll come back to that, but if you specifically want to earmark funds for education, a 529 plan can be a really great option because when those contributions go into the account, you get some tax deductions on those depending on the state you live in. Pennsylvania has one of the most generous deductions that you can take on 529 plan contributions. It is for 2026 anyways, $19,000 per person, and you can double that if you're married. So that's going to be $38,000 per year per beneficiary that you can donate to or that you can give to a 529 plan to set aside for education expenses. And whenever you set that money aside in the 529 plan, that is going to grow with the markets. You can choose funds that are going to allow those dollars to grow a little bit faster than they will if you just put those dollars in a savings account. And then when you're ready to pull funds out for distributions, obviously we would assume that account is going to be larger than what it was whenever you first put the contributions into it. But anything used for qualifying education expenses is going to be a tax-free deduction or a tax-free distribution, And then most of this is going to be for college, but you can use some of these dollars as well for K through 12 expenses if you have a child who's going to a private school. SATs can be funded, the fees for SATs or other kind of, prep, those exams can be funded with dollars from 529 plans without any kind of tax liability to you. For K through 12 expenses, the limit, it actually just went up. It was $10,000 per year. They actually just bumped it up to $20,000 per year. So $20,000 can be distributed to the beneficiary for their education for K through 12 expenses. Now, when we get into higher education for college, there is no limit on how much can be distributed to them each year. So that's really where this benefit is going to come in, is especially earmarked for college, but obviously, again, you can use them for K through 12 as well if you need those funds. Contribution limits on 529 plans is extremely high. So there is no annual limit on how much can be contributed to a 529 plan each year. If you are one single person who is giving, let's say you gave the child $100,000 into your 529 plan. It's not that there will be any kind of taxes owed to you. There's no limits on that. You won't be penalized for that large of a contribution into the 529 plan. However, you will have to file a gift tax return with your taxes. And that's something to talk to your accountant about whenever you get to that point, is just making sure you keep record of the fact that you gave a larger contribution that's above the gift tax exclusion dollar amount. The gift tax exclusion is $19,000. Like I mentioned before, that's $19,000 per person per year. So if you are married filing jointly, you can gift up to $38,000 per person, per beneficiary, to an unlimited number of beneficiaries and not have to file that gift tax return. If you give above that, even if you give $40,000 for a married filing jointly couple, you have to file a gift tax return with your taxes. You're not going to owe any taxes, but the IRS just needs to know that you gave a larger gift than that gift tax exclusion amount. The total contribution limits that you can give to a 529 plan are also extremely high. I was looking at some of the states' contribution limits. Hawaii had one of the lower ones at $305,000. So you can donate or you can give a lot of money to a 529 plan without accounting for growth, just your contributions. You can give a lot of money to a 529 plan, and $300,000 is probably more than sufficiently going to cover your college expenses, depending on, at least for undergrad. If you've got, if you go to medical school, veterinary school, some of these higher education degrees, you may not have enough for that, but at least for undergrad, $300,000 is a pretty darn good chunk of money to give to the child. There's something else special that you can do with a 529 plan that makes it a little bit different from other ways to fund college. You can do what's called super funding a 529 plan. So instead of giving $19,000 in 1 year, you can actually give $19,000 times 5 years worth of contributions. And that allows you to accelerate your contributions up front. And then from there, that account's going to grow, obviously, and compound over time. So you can give $19,000 again, double that if you're married filing jointly, times up to 5. So it's up to 5 years worth of contributions that you are accelerating into 1 year. So if let's say you came into a large inheritance and you're trying to figure out what's the best thing to do with this money. If you have children, grandchildren that you want to make sure are taken care of from the education side of things, this can be a great option for you. You're going to be able to, again, accelerate those those contributions into the account without needing to file the gift tax return, because it's technically still part of that exclusion amount. So this can be a really great way to, again, accelerate those contributions into the account and let the account compound for longer. If the child is 10 and you do 5 years worth of contributions, then they have from age 10 to age 18 for all of those contributions to grow. Versus if you were to do that $19,000 per year, that's going to take a little bit longer for the growth to catch up. The only caveat with that is you have to outlive the 5-year term of the gift. So if you do 5 years worth of contributions up front, you have to live longer than 5 years for that exclusion to continue to apply to your taxes each year. So just some things to keep in mind, but this can be a really great way to very quickly fund college for the child. And it doesn't just have to be the person who sets up the account that can contribute to these accounts. Anybody can contribute to these accounts. So keep that in mind too, that if you have relatives who are giving, birthday money, holiday money, anything like that, any dollar bills that people want to give to the child, instead of just giving it to them outright for them to spend it on shoes or whatever else they're trying to spend it on today, you can set it aside for their future. And they probably won't miss it. So this can be a great way to, again, just kickstart those education funds to set them up for success in the future. But yeah, again, we're mostly talking about this for college planning. And let's say you have $200,000 in a 529 plan when your child turns 18 and they're ready to go to college, but they go to a school that is, a public university or maybe a community college. They're just taking some classes here and there, and they get their education fully done and there's still money left over in the 529 plan. What happens then? If you have other children or grandchildren, whoever that money was supposed to be for, you can either change the beneficiary on that original 529 plan. So if you have a sibling who they were the first to go to college, didn't use all the money, and they're not going to use that money for education, if you have a younger child who's still going to need that money, you can change the beneficiary to that younger child and they can use that money, and so on and so forth. So you can continue doing that and continue to basically carry on that money and continue to use it for college expenses, not just for one person. If you have an only child and you have money left over in the account, Then what happens? So you can do a couple different things. You can either distribute the money to them, which is going to be a taxable distribution. So it's not going to be, and they can just sort of get that money outright. But that may not be the best option for them just because it's not going to be that tax-free distribution that you were used to whenever you were using that money to pay for college. The other thing that we can do is we can transfer some of those funds into a Roth IRA for the benefit of the child. So the limit is $35,000 that can be converted from the 529 plan into a Roth IRA. Little bit of caveats here. So the 529 plan has to be open for at least 15 years for you to be able to do these Roth conversions. The other caveat is you can't just convert $35,000 in 1 year. There are limits that the IRS sets on contributions into regular Roth IRAs, and 529 plan conversions to Roth IRAs also follow the same contribution limits. So whenever you transfer this money from the 529 plan to the Roth IRA, you're going to be subject to the contribution limits of a Roth IRA, which are $7,500 for 2026. That limit typically goes up every year, but it depends on legislation. But basically what'll happen is you transfer those funds from the 529 plan to the Roth IRA, and then over the course of several years, you'll have $35,000 in a Roth IRA for the benefit of the child. So those are some other things you can do with the 529 plan funds if the child doesn't need all of those distributions for college. Now, what happens if you deplete the 529 plan and they still need expenses or still need funds for college? That's whenever we might need to think about them taking on some student loans. We can take on, whenever you file your FAFSA each year, that's the free application for federal student aid. When you file that application, which is, the deadline is June 30th, so we've already passed it for this school year, but every year it's going to be June 30th is the deadline to file. That's when the federal student aid, they will determine what eligibility requirements, they will determine what the student is eligible for in terms of what they can receive in terms of subsidized and unsubsidized federal student loans. Now, these are loans that have to be paid back to wherever it is, Nelnet. There's a couple other providers that have those, that host those student loans, but these are not grants. Grants are things that do not need to be paid back. These are needs-based college funding that, again, does not need to be paid back. Things like Pell Grants are going to be one of those things. So these are needs-based, again, funding methods that someone can take advantage of on a needs basis. Student loans are sort of on a needs basis, just because if you have no other options for college planning, then you're going to need student loans, right? But you can take out these federal loans, which again, that's going to come out every year, every semester for the child of what they qualified for. And then if there's anything else that's needed and, you guys don't have the resources to fund out of pocket for those expenses, then we can maybe talk about private student loans. So these are going to just be your typical, sort of like a personal loan, have an interest rate attached to them. Typically, you don't need to make payments on these loans throughout school. Sometimes maybe they require a $25 a month payment or something like that, something very reasonable just to sort of eat into the interest a little bit on the loans. But a lot of the times in terms of what's necessary on a principal payment basis is not necessary to start making those payments on until the student graduates. And even after that, there's typically a grace period for a few months to allow the child to get into the workforce so that they can start making money to pay those student loans back. But that's going to be year by year if that's something that you need whenever we're thinking about college funding. In my opinion, having student loans is not that big of a deal. It's something that a lot of students deal with whenever they're coming out of school, is having student loans. And it is a big piece of someone's expenses sometimes, depending on what it is. But if you have no other options and you want to set the child up first as successful of a future as possible, student loans may be the only thing that you can receive to allow them the opportunity to go to school. But having the responsibility of making a monthly payment on time to build your credit, to just show that you're a responsible borrower, is not the worst thing in the world for a student to take on as they're getting ready to enter adulthood. That's just my opinion. Some people think differently about student loans. They're not super high interest rate like credit cards are. So it's not going to be that they're paying thousands upon thousands of dollars towards interest every month like they might be if they were carrying a revolving balance on a credit card. But it's still, I can see where people, don't want to take those on, and the frustrations of having debt and your debt to income ratio being high, especially just starting out, can be a little bit frustrating. But again, if that's your options for funding college, then what else can you do? Let's talk about some other ways you can fund education expenses too if you have the dollars available. So I mentioned UTMA accounts. So UTMA accounts that stands for the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. And this is going to be a little bit in contrast to 529 plans like I already alluded to. UTMA accounts actually technically belong to the student or the beneficiary of the account, versus the 529 plan is what's called a custodial account. Custodial accounts are your social security number as the person giving the money to them. You have control of that money. You are the one whose social security number is on the 529 plan. But with a UTMA account, that student's or that beneficiary's social security number is the one attached to the account. Now with UTMAs, there also was UGMAs, that was the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act, but a lot of states have done away with UGMAs, so it's going to probably, if you want to open up an account like this, it's probably going to be a UTMA account, but it's going to depend on the state you live in. So please ask, your plan administrators or whoever you're working with of whether a UTMA or UGMA is going to be the right option for you. But we're going to just assume that everybody's on the UTMA train. And again, just talking about those, the limits on those the rules around those are about the same with UGMA versus UTMA. So I'm going to talk about them interchangeably. But with UTMAs, the unique thing about these is, well, first of all, there's no tax deduction on contributions. So they do not have the state tax deductions like you had with a 529 plan. That does not exist on a UTMA. But what happens whenever you take those distributions out, whenever the child needs funds for whatever it is, there's also no tax deductions there. So it's going to be taxed like capital gains distributions would be with the growth of the accounts. Something special happens to a UTMA whenever the child reaches the age of majority. The age of majority varies depending on the state that you live in. So I'm just using, again, Pennsylvania as a reference because that's the state I live in. Pennsylvania's age of majority is 21. So when the child reaches some states, it's 18, 19, somewhere, around there. Sometimes it's 25. But it just depends on the state that you live in. But with a UTMA, what happens is when the child reaches that age, the account is going to be given directly to them for their management. So the account becomes theirs. So you, as the person who was sort of overseeing the account, as the parent, grandparent, whatever your relation is to that child, at age 21 or whatever age of majority it is, you will fall away from that account, and the account will then be owned outright by the child. Depending on your feelings about that, some people don't appreciate that they are giving up that control when the child is still pretty young. But the nice thing about the UTMA here is that you have more flexibility with what you can do with those funds. So if you think that your child may not go to college, they may go, they want to start their own business. You want them to have funds earmarked for a wedding, for a down payment on a house, for a car, whatever that looks like. A UTMA might be the better way to go because it allows the child to have a little more flexibility with what they do with those distributions. And then from there, when the account becomes the child's, they can continue contributing to the account if they want to, and it can continue to be invested in the markets in whatever whatever investment choices the child wants to make. But that lack of control sometimes, or the fact that you're giving up control whenever the child reaches a certain age, sometimes people don't love that idea because, again, the child is still pretty young. If age of majority is 21, still pretty young. And to be given a large lump sum of money, I know for me anyways, at 21, that would not have been a good thing. So if that is the case, an alternative that we can offer to our clients is going to be an account that you, as the donor, owns, and the child is listed as the beneficiary on that account. What's called a transfer on death. They become the beneficiary on that account. So what happens there is you can contribute money to the account and you have total control over that asset. It's earmarked for the child, so we don't want to include that in your retirement plan necessarily, but that money is earmarked for them, but it allows you to retain control past the age of majority. And then from there, you could either give the child some of those funds for the wedding, the home, the down payment, the new car, whatever that is. Or at some point, you could also transfer ownership to the child outright, and you can just eventually let them have total control of the account. But maybe it's not until they're 30 instead, where you don't have to give up control as soon as they hit that age of majority. So that can be an alternative that works in a similar way to a UTMA in terms of, the money can be earmarked for whatever the child wants, but that transfer on death situation or that account gives you a little more control for a little bit longer. With UTMAs, something else to keep in mind is depending on what kind of capital gains are embedded in the account or what kind of dividends are being generated from the investments that are within the UTMA account. One of the hiccups here might be that the child might be subject to kiddie tax rules, but that is something to talk to your accountant about. But it's important to keep year-end statements, to keep your tax documents, of course, and just file those things with your taxes just to make sure that nothing is being missed and that, if there are kiddie tax rules that are applying to the child's tax return, and that's because the account is owned by the child. With 529 plans, again, the account is technically owned by you, so those capital gains would be part of your tax return, but there are no kiddie tax rules with the money that's owned by an adult. But if the child has earned income, that's where these kiddie tax rules might come into play, and then the dividends that are kicking off from a UTMA account may affect their tax liability in any one given year. And all of these accounts can, again, be invested in the markets, and they should be invested in the market. So whether that's a 529 plan, the UTMA, or your TOD account, those should all be invested in the markets. And you want that to be the case because you want that growth to compound over time. Sometimes people just open up savings accounts for their children, which is, again, a really great thing to do to get them started. But it is not going to, cash accounts typically do not outperform what's happening in the markets. You typically get maybe a 2% rate of return on your cash or like a 3-4% if you've got a high yield savings account. Money markets, CDs, sometimes those things offer, or those products offer higher rates of return. But if it's just sitting in a cash account, you may not even get 1% on it, depending on what bank you have and what the rates are at that time. So having that is a great thing to have some liquidity for the child, but you also, to start them out, again, if you have the dollars to do so, having those dollars invested in something is going to be very beneficial to keep up with inflation and keep pace with the markets over time. And then along the lines of gifting, one of the other options you have for funding education is going to be gifts sent directly to the university whenever you get to that point. What this allows you to do is actually, there is no gift tax exclusion amount on contributions sent or tuition paid directly to the university. So if one semester of tuition is $20,000 and you have $20,000 that you want to give to the child for education, you can send it right to the university of your choosing, and you do not have to pay any gift or no gift taxes. You don't have to file a gift tax return either with your taxes. So depending on how much those education costs are, this can be a great way to donate those funds and not have to again file any gift tax returns. If you again were to just give the money to the child and you'd have to file that gift tax return instead. So there's an unlimited amount of dollars that can be sent directly to the university without any IRS notifications needing to be made. But all in all, I went through that kind of quickly. If you have more questions about the options that you have for funding your child's education, give us a call. It's 724-733-4334. We're happy to help you wade through your options and figure out what is the best option for your unique situation. And how does this fit into your overall financial plan? If you enjoyed today's episode, give us a like, follow us on all social media platforms at Watch Your Assets, and we will see you on the next one.